Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 8th webinar for local and regional governments towards COP25 in Chile de Santiago in 2019 December. My name is Yunus Arikan, and I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, which is the focal point of local governments and municipal authorities constituency as the moderator and the coordinator of this webinar series. Today, we will have an 1 hour of presentation and Q&A session. We are extremely happy and delighted to have our colleagues Marshall Cohen from the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, Chief of Staff, as well as Hamza Tiber from Executive Office of the UN Secretary General joining us, where we really appreciate their time and interest to provide us, especially the sections related to the UN Climate Action Summit in New York on 23rd of September. Today's webinar will focus on 3 main chapters. We will have a brief review. Our last webinar was in 3rd of July. It's more like 6 weeks or so since the webinars, or even more actually. We would like to refresh our memories from our climate advocacy agenda, as well as latest updates since this webinar. As we said, Marshall and Hamza will share with us their updates from the UN Climate Action Summit, and then we will conclude with key events on the way to COP25. For those who have been participating, or you're familiar, but for those who are joining for the first time, at the beginning of this webinar, all of the attendees are muted, and we encourage you to type your questions during the webinar to the question box. Especially for the UN Climate Action Summit, I would give a break so that your questions can immediately be raised to our guests and panelists. But we prefer the other questions to be gone through at the end of this webinar, which is more or less 30 minutes in overall duration of the presentation, so that we can have at least 30 or 20 minutes of Q&A session. And if you wish, you can also raise your hand so that we can unmute you, so that you can also interact verbally. Sometimes it's much easier than typing. So this is also possible depending on the technical connections. So let's start now our presentation. We usually start for an overview is that the climate process is a cyclic process. The host country every year at the end of the year, which is December or November, is not just only technically hosting the climate conference, but also they are the political responsible for the implementation of the outcomes, which is the presidency task. And the next country who will host the next COP are the incoming presidency, where they also interact, but they take the helm once the conference starts in their country. So in that sense, from 2018, we have started with Poland as the president of COP24, and now we are very expecting the leadership of the Chilean government as the incoming COP25 presidency. Each country has the authority to define their own president. In the case of Poland, we have the state secretary from Ministry of Energy, Michał Kurtyka, as the president of COP24, and Carolina Schmidt from Minister of Environment of Chile is the president's incoming president, or president designate in Chile. And every year, the negotiators meet in a midterm period, May or June in Bonn, to prepare for the outcomes in the end of the year. And since 2016, as a legacy of the Paris Agreement, we have the Marrakesh Partnership, who is also led by the high-level climate champions, who are responsible for engaging stakeholders on the action agenda. In the case of Polish presidency, this is Thomas Khrushchev, and the Chilean presidency has announced Gonzalo Munoz as the high-level champions for the Chilean presidency. Again, a recap. Last year, we had been engaged actively in the Talanoa dialogues. This was an opportunity for us to discuss with the national governments the idea of bringing sustainable urban development in collaboration with climate action, as well as engaging all levels of government. It was not an easy process. We have negotiated, we have provided inputs that this Talanoa dialogue was a year-round process and every city could participate, and our constituency provided a very impressive response. We had held 60 events in 40 countries. The importance is that the decision in Katowice says that the countries are encouraged to make use of the experience of Talanoa dialogues to review their NDCs. This is a fantastic legitimacy for us to be actively involved in the implementation and the enhancement of the new NDCs. As we said, cyclic process. There are numerous agenda items that is traditionally covered, and every year presidencies have their own priorities, and our agenda as the constituency is also reflecting to that. So in a regular year, we try to be involved in the showcasing of our activities, what our constituency is doing, local and regional governments worldwide, either through online information platforms like CDP ICLEI, or hosting events, side events, or summits. We participate in consultations. This takes place during the year as workshops or Marrakesh partnership dialogues. And then we try to contribute in the decision making. We know the interventions are our positions, but the real negotiations are done by the negotiators. And among those friendly nations, which we have started to use the term Friends of Cities since 2013, we have now evolved into Friends of Multi-Level Action. For this year in 2019, we want to benefit from the decision of COP24 to connect the Talanoa experience to the NDC process. We would like to work on climate finance because there is a special meeting this year, and we want to contribute to the raise ambition as the expectation of the UN Climate Action Summit, which we'll go through in details. This is new. The new thing is that every year presidencies announce their priorities. Chilean government, beginning of the year, announced 7 themes, but after the meetings in Bonn, they have increased the number of topics and they have added cities as a standalone agenda for their priority, which is giving us the confidence, responsibility, and of course the expectations that there will be impressive outcomes to have more concrete outcomes and visibility for engagement of local and regional governments. Therefore, we're excited to see this positive feedback after all our interaction with the presidency of the Chilean government, so that cities is now climbing higher on the agenda. As we remember, we have our own internal agendas as LGMA, like our global summits. This year it will be C40 and UCLG. We have regional events like local climate solutions, or global events like Urban 20. R20 has also had their conference. We follow the UNFCCC negotiations, not just in Bonn, but in the climate weeks and other fora. And there are other UN forums, especially this year was very busy. We had Environment Assembly, Habitat Assembly, as well as a high-level political forum. Even on climate and desertification will be a discussion. And throughout the year, there was an intensive pressure from the grassroots and the citizen groups. And now we are expecting a global massive mobilization on the 20th of September, Friday, as the global climate strike. So that is where we are prepared overall in the climate agenda. Let's remember in the June sessions in Bonn, there was impressive, again, interactions in a number of mandated events and side events as well. We also had participated in the Climate Action Studio with 3 mayors from Izmir, Katbaloga, and Recife. But the most important event of the 2 weeks in Bonn was the very special event with the COP24 presidency, a special joint event on multi-level action, climate action, with a focus on e-mobility and adaptation. This was a unique event for a number of reasons. For the first time, presidency was a follow-up, had made a follow-up process. They hosted 3 events from their 3 initiatives, but our event, the one on multi-level action, was the only one that was organized in collaboration with the constituency. We also have worked very closely with the Secretariat. There are over 50 subnationals, including mayors and city and regional leaders at all levels. We had Secretariat teams, diverse teams joining us. There were a number of parties, again, not just for the presidency and the upcoming incoming presidency, but also EU, Mexico, Senegal, Germany, Morocco, as well as stakeholders, German Watch, Slokat, Koika. This shows how the agenda of cities are so inclusive and also so exciting to interact. But having the leadership of our constituency and having this recognition for the first time in an agenda of the UNFCCC, I think is giving us the confidence that we are advancing in the right direction. And we also have launched officially the UNFCCC Friends of multi-level action through this process. There was an important updates in the sense that cities agenda was now officially recognized in the IPCC. We have the proceedings of the Edmonton conference. The research dialogue had officially given a space for climate change and cities, and the agenda is also captured by the partners of the organizing committee of the Edmonton, so that now we have full coverage of the science agenda that is giving us the confidence that we can move much actively. After the June conference, we had participated as the constituency in New York at the high-level political forum, which is covering the SDGs annually. This year, SDG 13 climate was one of the themes, and the global report of the local and regional governments coordinated by UCLG included a chapter which was coordinated by C40 with inputs from ICLEI and the Regions 4 and other partners. That is also connecting our agenda to the SDGs. And over these past weeks, especially, there was an intensive increase of the councils declaring climate emergency. We even, as ICLEI and the Residencies Congress, had a very interesting discussions with Fridays for Future, who were directly interacting with the mayor of Bonn, among those cities who have announced the climate declaration, emergency declaration, which overall globally is reaching to around 1,000 local governments or constituency worldwide, which is giving the confidence that the expectations and the hope for ambitious action is increasing. With this summary, I'd like to give the floor first to Hamza, as the lead staff for the preparation of the summit, especially in the infrastructure, cities, and local action track. So just to recap the overall objectives of the summit, but also go through the current initiatives on the table, and Marshall will take us through the agenda of the couple of days in New York. Hamza, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Yunus. Hello, everyone, and congratulations, first of all, to Yunus for all the hard work that has gone into this year and in the lead up to COP25. So, as Yunus was mentioning, Sophie Aubert and myself are the co-leads on the infrastructure and citizen local action track of the summit. As you know, the Secretary General has decided to convene a climate action summit ahead of the 2020 deadline to keep the momentum strong around the urgency to raise the level of ambition, both in the NDCs and the long-term strategies as well, and to mobilize all actors, whether they are national governments, subnational governments, private sector, civil society, etc., to send the strong message that the situation we're facing is an emergency, but that also we have already, in large part, the tools to respond to the crisis, because we have technologies and finance and all the tools that are needed to kickstart or enhance climate action. So without talking too much about the summit, which I think you've been briefed about already, I just wanted to focus on specifically the track that is of interest to us today, which is the ICLEI track, so infrastructure, cities, and local action. And I wanted to mention from the beginning that there are initiatives that have emerged from this track, which is co-led by Turkey and Kenya with the support from UN Habitat. But there are other initiatives that came out of other coalitions that are relevant to cities and local government as well. So maybe we'll say a word about those, notably the coalitions looking at social and political drivers, nature-based solutions, energy, etc. All have adaptation, of course, all have initiatives that are relevant to cities and local governments. So I'll probably say a word about those towards the end. I also wanted to start this quick overview by emphasizing that the added value of this summit specifically with regards to cities and local governments is also to mobilize national governments to provide the means and the tools and enable action at the subnational level when it is needed. So it's not only when we're talking about cities and local government in the framework of this summit, it's not only to ask for additional commitments from cities and local governments, but also really to mobilize national governments in first stressing the importance of this agenda, the urban agenda, but also stressing the need to ramp up the support and the means that national governments can provide to cities and local governments in implementing their climate plans. So very quickly, we have quite a few initiatives that emerged from the ICLEI track. The first one is an initiative around zero carbon buildings, which mirrors very closely the initiative that was presented last year at the GCAS, and for which several cities have indicated their support. But this time around, this mirror initiative or complementary initiative is targeting national governments and DFIs, so international financial institutions, and it's built around two components essentially. The first one is looking at the policy roadmaps that need to be developed at the national level in collaboration with cities and local governments to have clear roadmaps on how to promote zero carbon buildings and have all new buildings by 2030 be zero carbon or net zero carbon rather, and looking at how to retrofit the existing stock of buildings by 2050. And so, I mean, without going into the details, the proposal is very detailed, and but this is just a very general overview. Just wanted to mention first that it's not looking necessarily at a building per building basis, but rather looking at in some instances at the aggregate level, at the district or neighborhood level, because sometimes low rises or certain type of buildings cannot be zero carbon. So there is this nuance that is important. It's also focused on the operational footprint of buildings, not the embodied emissions that you can find in cement and steel and the construction material that is used. But we would very much like to see this embodied part of the emissions be the next target going forward, maybe after 2020. But for now, the operational footprint of buildings is a low-hanging fruit that can be addressed with existing technologies, and so we're going for that at this stage. That's for the policy. For the finance, the target is to realign or reallocate $1 trillion of which represents somewhere around 5% of the projected investments that will be directed towards buildings in developing countries by 2030. So it's a fairly modest target in terms of the percentage of investments that will be going towards buildings, but it's already a very big sum as you see. So that's basically for the components of the initiative. The aim is to send a strong signal to the private sector as well, and signal that there is a shift now towards zero carbon buildings, and that and want to create a momentum in favor of type of buildings. In terms of the national governments that have been approached so far by the proponents of the initiative, we have the Emirates, we have Kenya, Singapore, Turkey, Colombia, Argentina, India, Mexico, Germany, and Denmark. They're not all confirmed as supporters of this initiative, but we're having discussions with them. UAE has already indicated that it's supports the initiative and wants to implement policy roadmaps. Several financial institutions as well are supporting this initiative, among them the World Bank, EBRD, IFC, EIB, and others. And of course, we have representatives from the private sector as well. So that's in a nutshell the initiative on buildings. On transport, we have an initiative called ACT, which stands for Action Towards Climate-Friendly Transport, and which is centered around 4 components. The first one is a policy making support component. The other one, the second one, is a mass rollout of electric buses and wheelers via the TUMI initiative. The third component looks at freight vehicles and is closely supported by the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. And the fourth component is around encouraging public-private dialogue platforms. And one example of that you might be familiar with is the Moving On ecosystem, which includes a Moving On lab, which are sorts of think tanks or think and do tanks, and an annual summit that gathers many stakeholders. So 4 components looking at policy, concrete project implementation, and encouraging better dialogue between the private sector and the public sector. This initiative is supported by Germany and the Netherlands, with support from, of course, C40, ICLEI, and GECOM as well, and many others. The SLOCAT Secretariat has a very active role as well as GIZ, in kind of holding the pen for this initiative. I'm going a little bit fast, but there is a lot of ground to cover, so that's why I'm being very succinct in my presentation. So the other initiative that I wanted to talk about is the initiative co-led by Kenya and UN Habitat, which looks at building the resilience of the urban poor. And it's basically centered around 3 components. The first one is a mapping of 140 hotspot cities that have communities that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The second component is looking at how to improve the resilience of 150 million slum dwellers in these hotspot cities by better mainstreaming planning and taking into consideration the specific needs of these communities in urban planning, and better integrating these needs also in the NDCs and the NAPs, the National Adaptation Plans of national governments. And of course, there is also an ask to international financial institutions, asking them also to dedicate specific funds to support the improvement of improving the resilience of these communities in these hotspot cities. As I said, this effort is spearheaded mostly by Kenya and UN Habitat, with support by several organizations, including private sector actors as well. And of course, we will be able to send you, documents that give a more detailed overview of this. But moving on to the next initiative, which is the Leadership for Urban Climate Investments, called LUCI. This one is mostly looking at the decentralized finance and local finance. It's led by the government of Germany, with the support from GECOM and many other institutions as well. Basically, it's aiming at creating a stronger architecture for subnational climate finance and to better coordinate the different stakeholders that are involved in the project life cycle when it comes to urban infrastructure. It aims at increasing the number of bankable projects. It also aims at improving the financing options for cities and strengthening capacity, providing technical assistance. It's a very comprehensive approach to the whole project life cycle, as I said, from project preparation all the way to tagging and monitoring the financial flows once they've been dispersed. I would like to highlight here in Lucy two very important components of this initiative, which are the GAP fund that GECOM is supporting and working on very actively with the federal government of Germany, and also the revival, if you'd like, of the CCFLA, which is intended to become the connecting tissue between the different components of this initiative, with a revamped secretariat and additional means provided to the secretariat to fulfill this function of matchmaking and sharing knowledge and data, etc., etc. Then I wanted also to briefly mention an initiative that is for now called the African Initiative for Sustainable Cities, and which is a kind of response by central governments, specifically African governments, to the needs and requests of subnational actors in terms of creating a platform that would be able to centralize information, to deliver several services by leveraging on a network of partners. It would be kind of based on the blueprint of the NDC partnership, if you'd like. So with a component of knowledge sharing, but also, as I said, matchmaking, and mostly using the expertise and the resources of the partner organizations to provide the whole range of services to cities and local governments, and the overall intent or objective to improve this famous vertical integration and create the right conditions for greater climate ambition at the subnational level in Africa. The idea would be to replicate this at a later stage in other regions, but for now the focus is on Africa, especially because Kenya, and Ethiopia have indicated that they wanted to launch such an initiative. So there is a strong political commitment on their part to work on this. They've been talking to a number of countries, including Morocco, Nigeria, the Ivory Coast, etc. There are also ongoing discussions with the UNEP and the African Development Bank to see how they could also support this initiative. And again, happy to send you further information at a later stage. And before concluding, I wanted to mention the Coalition of Urban Transitions Global Report, which will be launched ahead of the summit in September, and which will be featured very prominently during the program during the summit itself, as it relates to cities and local action. So we will have, of course, the cut conclusions and framing as the evidence-based narrative behind the work that we're doing in the framework of the ICLEI track. We will also have a dedicated event to the launch of the cut report in the afternoon on the Sunday, but I think that maybe Marshall will say a word about that later. And and it's a very important piece in the overall narrative around the importance of the urban agenda as it relates to climate change. There are, of course, many other initiatives that are relevant to our discussion, particularly the NDC Partnership Climate Action Enhancement Program that has been kind of already announced in Abu Dhabi, and which has already concluded its first round of submissions from national governments asking for support to enhance their NDCs. It's going very well, and maybe I can say a word about it if we have time. We also have an initiative on air quality and health that was launched in the framework of the Social and Political Drivers Coalition, and for which we asked our colleagues in the cities and local government networks to mobilize their constituencies and membership to support this initiative. And there are a few others related to cooling and energy efficiency that are relevant as well. I mentioned also the nature-based solutions initiatives, and you will see that we have a dedicated event on nature-based solutions for cities in close collaboration with Cities with Nature initiative of ICLEI, and we hope to have global ambassador of ICLEI for biodiversity there as well. And yes, there is so much to say and so little time. So I think I'll stop here, and maybe rather than keep on talking, maybe answer questions if you have any, or I don't know, Yunus, how you want to proceed.
Dear Hamza, we really appreciate it. It is really, even to explain is a challenge, and just to manage the whole things is even harder than what you have been presented. So first of all, we'd like to thank the whole executive office of the Secretary General, especially in collaborating with the ICLEI track and with the networks, your support, and you were always ready to respond our questions. So we would like to commend you, and of course the SGA office in its entirety. But you can see our participant of this webinar can also understand in the past couple of months the amount of work. So, and I think that was a really nice summary. And as you mentioned, in a couple of days, I think you are able to circulate these 2-pagers and more to come later on. So let's now go to Marshall, another valuable partner and colleague who had been the bridge between all these tracks and the partners and the networks on behalf of Global Covenant of Mayors, who was the moderator of our engagement mobilization. Marshall, the floor is yours to take us through, as some of them were mentioned by Hamza, but in a more systematic way, the couple of days in New York, what to expect.
Sure. Thank you, Yunus, and thank you, Hamza, for providing all the background information, and also for being so supportive so far through this process. Looking at the main events taking place in New York, the ones featured here mostly happening at the UN, but several also outside. The first that we're really seeing the summit kick off is in the weekend before, where there will be track-specific events and thematic themed events, all in relation to the Climate Action Summit and the various tracks that Hamza just went through. So starting on Saturday in the morning, there is an event by UCCRN on a new report on science for 1.5 degree cities that they're organizing, and they are looking for representatives from local governments and mayors to participate in their programming. On Saturday afternoon, it is where GCOM, on behalf of all of the city networks and partners, are working with the Executive Office of the Secretary General, as well as the for both the ICLEI track and also now with the Nature-Based Solutions Coalition to organize an event around subnational mobilization and subnational ambition. I will go into that on the next slide. On Sunday, there is the actual programming being organized by the ICLEI track, which we have more detail on in the next slide, but is being organized to feature each of the initiatives that Hamza just ran through in the ICLEI track itself and show how those connect and tell the story from the infrastructure, cities, and local action angle. On Sunday afternoon, there will be the formal launch event for the CUT report. They'll be launched ahead of the summit to really give the narrative of where the opportunity is for cities and give specific recommendations from national government give specific recommendations to national governments to support cities in their climate action and all that cities can offer. On Monday, there's the summit itself, with that program still coming together, but details will be shared when more information is available on that. There's potentially an event being organized by New York City at Columbia University that will be held after the summit. On the 24th, that's when the SDG summit will happen as the high-level political forum. There's associated programming that will happen alongside the SDG summit. UCLG, as Secretariat of the Global Task Force, has led on the submission of those programs, and those are still yet to be confirmed, but there will be opportunities for mayors and local governments there. On Wednesday, the 25th, the SDG Summit will continue, and that's where there will be a localizing roundtable. Also on the 25th is the Bloomberg Global Business Forum, and then there's also a side event being organized by a multitude of partners specific on finance for the afternoon of the 25th. And then on the 26th is another opportunity that we're looking at for potential finance announcements. It's a high-level dialogue on financing for development, the first dialogue of this kind being organized at the UN. It's being co-led by Canada and Ghana, and again, another opportunity where there's a good chance for announcements to be made, and also an opportunity for mayors and local government officials to be represented and have speaking opportunities. If we could go to the next slide. These are the two events that there's really the most opportunity for us to program and place mayors and representatives from subnational governments. As I mentioned on the 21st, this is really the programming focused on subnationals and specifically cities and local governments. We are breaking it into 3 sections, with one section being on nature-based solutions and the enhancing subnational climate action, nature-based solutions for cities, where that will be a multi-level panel with national government representatives, mayors, governors, and representatives from UN organizations and civil society. The second panel will be on really the impact and commitments of subnationals to date, showcasing all that has been done in the lead up to this point, that for many years subnationals have been making commitments and launching new campaigns, starting before 2014 at the 2014 Climate Action Summit, and then even last year at the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco. It's really highlighting that and showing how cities have been getting on, where there are still gaps, but also having a multi-level dialogue between cities and national governments to showcase really good examples that have come so far through collaborative action and through multi-level governance, and exploring opportunities for future opportunities. And then the third section being on financing, and really tying to the decentralized finance track, that sub-track of the ICLEI track that Hamza discussed. So for each of those events, there are significant opportunities to highlight and have speakers from mayors and national governments, the Global Covenant of Mayors, in coordination with UN Habitat, the Global City Networks, and all of the city networks that are our partner to GCOM are working to coordinate the delegation of subnational actors that will be in New York, especially for the weekend before. So would welcome any recommendations from this group after this call on any speakers that you might have available and would recommend to take part in this event. On the 22nd, that is the official ICLEI integrated programming that's being organized by the SG's office, and we'll really take what's talked about on Saturday and show how everything is moving and what has advanced to be announced in New York at the summit, where there are opportunities for new partnership, where some nationals are leading, but also as Hamza mentioned, and we think is really important, is where there are opportunities for national governments to mobilize new resources and create enabling policies so that subnationals can be a part of the process for increasing ambition and action. And again, there is an opportunity there to make recommendations for speakers, so would welcome those from you as well. And then finally, just a last note, since we have been coordinating the core GCOM partners and city networks in this process of liaising with the different member state leads and co-leads, as well as the UNSG's office, as we kind of really approach these final weeks to the summit, we prepared a letter that was endorsed by the partners that are listed here, outlining the key priorities from the city network community, and it was well received by the SG's office, and that was directed to the special envoy. And really the main priorities that we've identified and have been working towards and think are really now clearly being heard is that there needs to be a recognition of all of the existing commitments and date that have been done through time, and be an opportunity for member states and for national governments heading into COP25, the opportunity to see locally determined contributions as they're coming from some national governments, providing a platform for cities and local governments to be heard and to be seen at the UN, which we definitely feel has been heard with the events that we just spoke about, as well as exploring opportunities within the summit itself. Really using the Coalition for Urban Transitions report that will be released on September 17th as the overarching narrative for what cities and local governments need and key recommendations that national governments can take to help that. The GAP fund that's part of the Decentralized Finance Lucy initiative, and then also a piece on air quality and prioritizing how we continue to make sure that air quality and the connection between climate change and health is championed by the city networks, and working together with the leaders for the summit, like the WHO in Spain, who are leading on this initiative to provide an opportunity for cities to be well resourced to consider that.
Dear Marshall, I also would like to once again, on behalf of ICLEI and all the partners, not just for today's presentation and your time, but also throughout the year, your support, as mentioned before. As participants of this webinar would understand, there is still a lot of work to do, but we have come to a really good, let's say, picture or narrative, and also key messages. Therefore, we are excited with the in-person participation. We are able to communicate and take back home the outcome, so that we will continue for the implementation with the impetus received from New York with the climate summit. I think it may be good, because the next couple of slides we will focus on the other events towards December, but it may be good if there will be any points, questions, clarifications, or additions that any of the partners attending this call could raise now. I just would like to reiterate that you can type your questions or you can raise your hands. I see many familiar names. For most of them, these are not extremely new things, but it was really, even for me, I was very happy to see in its entirety, both from Hamza and Marshall. But if, of course, there's no question at this stage, we can continue and feel free. I assume Hamza can and Marshall can still join us, although we have 10 more minutes. Maybe in the last couple of minutes can still be providing some concluding remarks. Let's then go ahead for the next a couple of slides. So towards COP, let's remember the UN Climate Summit is not a negotiation session, but it is just like how it was created. It has created an impact for the Paris Agreement. We would expect the momentum would feed into the NDCs in the 2020. Therefore, it is important to make the bridge between climate summit and the official negotiation processes. And among them, now over the last years, a good opportunity is the regional climate weeks, which is bringing closer the debate on the COPs to the regions, customizing it, localizing it, and even this week now we are having the one of the promising climate weeks, this time in Latin America and Caribbean. The importance is that this is for the first time a regional climate event that is co-hosted by a city. And in particular, even more than that, the city of Salvador has opened its doors of the city hall so that the city hall turned out to be a venue for a small COP for the region, let's say. Other than that, there are numerous sessions, but there is a spatial dialogue on NDCs. Originally, these sessions were limited to participation of the national governments, but the partners, UN Climate Secretariat and others, have agreed to open the doors to subnational government at all levels, and this practice hopefully will prove to be positive and fruitful. There are plans in the Asia Pacific Climate Week. NDC dialogue may also include business representatives so that it is even more inclusive. Numerous partners of the constituency of LGMA, but also the ICLEI track, be it from transport to the energies, renewable energy, they're having side events and sessions or workshops or trainings. And because of the leadership of Salvador, there is also for the first time a mayor's panel in a regional climate week of the UNFCCC, which is on Friday. In between, the debate between land, climate, and nature is advancing. These are the 3 Rio Conventions, and which is trying to ensure the environmental integrity of all these sustainability efforts. The IPCC, this scientific body on climate, has just released a report on land, and that also address urban sprawl or urban expansion, but also opportunities like city food or urban food or peri-urban areas, how they can be better managed to support the food risks or other urban-rural continuum. The same time, the desertification COP will take place in India on the 7th of September, and there will be the first time a local and regional governments day taking place around the desertification, as especially rural-urban discussions. And as mentioned, biodiversity is prepared for a new era in the post-2020 period, and the new negotiations will start next week in Nairobi. And today, ICLEI has announced Mayor Valérie Plante from Montreal as the global ambassador, but ICLEI as the coordinator of the Cities with Nature and the subnational platform will work with other partners like Regions 4 and others so that our engagement in the negotiations continues and our visibility is enhanced. For the climate agenda in September, we have an important meeting in Beirut. This is the annual forum of the Standing Committee on Finance, this time particularly focusing on sustainable cities. This is extremely important opportunity because the outcomes will be directly reported to the COP. And many of the discussions, even you have seen, subnational finance is an important agenda of the summit as well. If the synergy can be created between the UN Climate Action Summit and this official UNFCCC body, this could be even more justifying that the outcomes will be enshrined in the global framework and the global construction of the finance architecture. Therefore, we are excited to participate. Many of the members of the LGMA constituency have been participating in the discussions. The last slide. We are still not concrete about what to expect in Chile in terms of the day-by-day planning. To this week, there may be additional little updates from Chile during the Latin America Climate Week in Salvador. But what we know today, there is a Ministers of Transport for the first time coming on the beginning of the first week. And around that date, we may think about an urban mobility event. And the rest of the priorities like circular economy, biodiversity, or adaptation or NDC integration could be discussed in the second week with the presence of ministers of environment or climate change or finance. Therefore, we are expecting that the high-level engagement could also be split. It will be important that we bring the targeted participants from our constituency so that they can talk to the right people and then they come up with good outcomes and feed into the decisions of COP25. As mentioned before, you can find all the previous webinars as well. I'd like to we are coming to a close in terms of timing. The rest information is familiar that you have been listening before. We have the links of our report from COP24, a capturing of our recognition in the Paris Agreement, and the key outcome of the Katowice is also available. I would like to give the opportunity if there is any remarks from the partners, anything that we have missed or ignored, or anything that is new that is not captured here, or any question for clarification, either on the COP25 agenda or for Climate Summit, both is possible. I don't see any hands raised or questions typed in so far. Hamza and Marshall, anything you'd like to add as a concluding remark?
Thank you, Yunus. I mean, not much other than reiterating what also Marshall mentioned, that we're looking also, of course, at options to have representatives from subnational level at the summit itself on Monday 23rd, hopefully on stage, to again convey the messages we've been discussing and potentially present one or more initiatives linked to the cities and local governments. So this is a conversation that is ongoing, and we're working on different scenarios, and we'll be able to update you and make some suggestions to our focal points very soon.
Excellent. Marshall?
No, just would like to thank you for providing this opportunity, and I hope that you can provide my contact information to everyone on the call, so that if they do have any recommendations or would like to share their delegations and help get involved with the sessions, we can work together to include them. And then also just thanks again to Hamza and Sophie and the SG's team for working together with all of us on this.
Excellent. So this concludes our session today. We will upload both the power presentation as the PDF format, but also the recording, both from the morning session and today afternoon, for some, of course, evening or morning, but they will be available, and we will definitely channel the questions to Hamza and Marshall as time proceeds, but also we will stay tuned for their updates so that we can circulate in the LGMA constituency and as well as the UNFCCC Friends of Multi-Level Action. With this, I'd like to thank you all, and I wish you all a nice day or an evening in your engagement, and thanks a lot for your interest.